And from our 17 Crime Watch file tonight, newly released data shows guns sold at one Bakersfield retailer have been linked to more crime than weapons sold by any other dealer in any major California city.
Welcome to the Chicago Justice Podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Siska. I'm also Executive Director of the Chicago Justice Project and Adjunct Professor in the Department of Justice Law, Criminology, and Security at American University. Today, we are focusing on Rancho Cucamonga, California. In California, throughout the state, and with a few stores in Arizona. Turner's sells a lot of guns, but also has a higher percentage, and even the percentage they sell, kind of outsized percentage of the guns that are recovered at crime scenes, referred to as crime guns by law enforcement. Turner also has a shorter time to crime than other retailers. A stat that is the time between a purchase and it's the gun being recovered at a crime scene. While the data does not tell us anything definitive, it does raise a lot of questions worth asking. Our guest today to help us delve into these issues is Arron Mendelson, data reporter at The Trace, who has covered this issue extensively. Let's get to our conversation with Arron, and I'll be back with you after. Arron Mendelson, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So Turner's Outdoorsman, which is what we're going to be talking about a lot today. If you look online, it says they function as a licensed gun dealer, licensed gun shop, hunting, shooting, and fishing specialty. So what's kind of the range of things you can buy at this place besides like a Glock?
Yeah, so Turner's Outdoorsman is a large chain. They're the biggest seller of guns in the state of California, over 30 locations in California and a handful more in Arizona. If you go into one, you will find firearms. You'll also find, like you said, hunting, fishing accessories, things like that. If you think of, if folks have been to maybe like a Cabela's or a Bass Pro Shop, it's like that, but smaller. They don't have the same kind of footprint or size of those, and they tend to be tucked away in kind of like suburban shopping centers rather than shopping malls like a Cabela's.
Okay, so your analysis published back in May looked at the fact that Turner's sells about 20% of the guns in California. Of the guns recovered at crime scenes, they make up about 25%. So I guess my first question is, what data did you use? Because this data isn't usually available in states. So what data did you use to get at this analysis?
Yeah, exactly. So the one reason this was fascinating to me and that I wanted to spend time looking into this is because at the federal level, we have no insight into this. Since 2003, the ATF has been prohibited from releasing this kind of information on gun traces to individual stores. So we have no sunlight coming into this area federally. Beyond that, like most U.S. states aren't tracking this information, so they don't have the kind of information about gun sales and crime gun recoveries, those kind of data systems to talk to each other to be able to do this analysis itself. So California is the only place in the country there's publishing data like this. And if folks don't know what a crime gun is like a gun that's recovered at is suspected to have been used in a crime, was used in a crime, or illegally possessed. And so I was looking at this very lengthy PDF that the state of California puts out, over 500 pages. And so I was just kind of scrolling through it, was stunned to see these like store level gun dealer traces that would say, Tracy's Gun Shop on 123 Main Street. They sold during this time period, 100 guns, and they had 5 guns traced back to them. This is the kind of stuff we can't get from the federal government, that we don't get in 49 other states. And so that's why I wanted to dive into it. And like you say, when I started to dive into it, the name Turner's Outdoorsman kept popping up again and again. It pops up if you look at the top gun dealers, like who the top 10 sources of crime guns are. You'll see Turner's sort of monopolizing the top of that list. But also, you want to kind of account for the fact that this is the biggest gun seller in the state of California. So you would expect, some amount of crime guns would be traced back to their stores, or traced back to any store, even if they're doing everything right. Like if you're selling enough firearms, like probably law enforcement will recover some of them. What was concerning, sources told me, was like the outsized share traced back to Turner. So like you say, 20% of sales that we saw in the data, but about 25% of crime guns. So their sales more likely to be recovered by law enforcement as crime guns.
Is there something specific related to Turner's practices? Like you said, they're the largest seller. Is this just an economies of scale thing, that they're just so much bigger than all the other gun sellers, they can undercut their price unless they're getting the most sales? Or is this something to their practices? Do they not run background checks? Are they in areas that are more prone? Do they specifically put stores in areas that they think are more prone to buying guns? Do we know?
Yeah, no, that's the $1 million question. Why are they overrepresented in this data? And the short answer is that we don't know. A lot of the factors that you brought up are things that people who are experts in this area. So I spoke to former ATF agents. I spoke to a former the guy who used to run the Bureau of Firearms for the state of California. And they said, when you're looking at a store and seeing a lot of crime guns traced to it, you want to think about several factors. Things like the price of handguns would be a factor. Cheaper firearms, the research shows, more likely to be recovered as crime guns. The location can matter, and anecdotally, many Turner's locations are in neighborhoods that struggle with high rates of violent crime, in places like San Bernardino, California, Bakersfield, California. So there may be a factor there. I had a former ATF agent tell me that like a gun dealer that's the only gun dealer in a community, when there's no other gun dealer nearby, that often can lead to elevated crime gun traces there. And then things like practices, so sales practices. So a gun dealer can deny a sale to anyone for any reason. Typically, you're only going to do that if there's something concerning about the sale. So a straw purchase, where if two people, you and I, go into a gun dealer and I'm like pointing and asking the questions to the staff, but then you go to buy it, that would be a major red flag. Like you should probably not complete that sale. So, stores are supposed to deny sales like that, train staff around that. But we don't have a ton of insight into exactly, across these 30 plus sales stores of Turner's Outdoorsman in the state of California, how exactly their practices compare to other stores. We don't know how many sales are turned away. We do know that the state has cited them for a few violations of possible straw purchases. They're not the only dealer to have been cited for that. But I spent a lot of time trying to look into this question and answer exactly why it's the case that Turner's accounts for so many crime guns in the state of California. And, at the end of this process, the honest thing to say was, we know there are certain factors that can lead to stores having more crime guns, but we don't know exactly why this chain accounts for such a huge number.
Also, Turner stands out in that they're quicker than usual, I guess, or than most, for the time between purchase and it shows up at a crime scene. I guess it's called time to crime. And regulators use a year as the mark. If it pops up in less than a year, that's an indicator of trafficking or straw purchasing. Do we know why regulators picked that time frame necessarily?
Yeah, well, that's like a kind of standard thing that law enforcement looks at when they're tracing these guns recovered as crime guns, the time to crime. Sometimes they'll look at 1 year, sometimes they'll look at 3 years. And this can be a major red flag if the guns are showing up really quickly. If not much time elapses between the sale and the recovery by law enforcement, that's an indicator of possible trafficking. The ATF would tell you, so would state law enforcement here in California. So that's something that the data captures. How many of these crime guns were recovered with low time to crimes. And we do see that the Turner's stores are accounting for a big chunk of these low time to crime guns in the state of California. And I should say, just because, we don't fully know why we're seeing this, doesn't mean it's not concerning. These former ATF agents, former chief of the Bureau of Firearms in California told me that these numbers are really concerning and alarming, and that they should be looked into.
Hannah LaCour, a professor
Yep.
of violence
From UC
prevention
Davis.
research, from UC Davis, found that 15% of California dealers account for 98% of the state crime guns that are recovered. That stat in my head says something about those 15% of dealers. It makes me automatically think, wow, they're probably doing something on purpose. Is that a fair way for me to think about that? Because I think a lot of people would hear that and be kind of put off by those numbers.
Yeah, well, so we don't, the data can tell us certain things, and on other questions, it's totally silent. So it doesn't tell us what is leading those 15% to be recovered at such a huge chunk of recoveries in the state of California. The folks at UC Davis have done a lot of really great research, and one thing that they found in this California data is that something about these big stores that sell lots of crime guns, they tend to be overrepresented. So even though they're selling a lot of guns overall, you tend to see more crime guns traced back to these stores. Again, the data doesn't tell us exactly why that would be the case, but that they see that in their academic research. To what we were talking about earlier, California is sort of a unique environment in which this stuff is tracked really closely. And the folks at UC Davis have even greater access to this data than we do as journalists or members of the public. They can see kind of individual level gun traces. And so they have produced a really interesting body of research that gets to some of these big picture questions, but can't exactly tell you why an individual dealer pops up so much.
Yeah, I mean, it just, when I read that, I was immediately thinking they must be purposely doing things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It also could be, we could pile a bunch of assumptions in here, just that they sell cheaper guns, right? I'm assuming the guns being left at these scenes are probably less expensive guns. So maybe that's part of it. It's we've been here forever. I'm going to say we need to find a solution, but we've needed to find a solution forever. Let's talk more broadly.
One thing, if I can interrupt you, one thing that also makes these conversations really challenging is like I keep saying, California is the only place where we, as members of the public, have access to this data. So there aren't these standard metrics like we might see with other, kind of government functions where we, would know exactly, okay, we see a high number, here's exactly how the public should think about this, or here's how government regulators, law enforcement, whoever should respond. The ATF doesn't have these numbers because the ATF, who right at the federal level, they're charged with regulating firearms in the United States. They don't track sales by dealer. They don't know how many guns an individual dealer sells. So when I was talking to an ATF agent about this, he was saying, well, that this is a really interesting comparison, the 25% compared to 20% thing that we've been discussing. But we at the ATF weren't, considering this because we didn't have access to that sales data. So just the scarceness of this data has made it, challenging for us to be able to answer these questions. And so, you often come up against this wall of okay, this data shows us something, but we don't, we're just so in the dark, and we know so much more in California than we do in other places, but there's so much we don't know.
Yeah, and that's the scary part. We know, so think of the position you're in. It's still, you don't know anywhere near enough, but yet you have so much more data than a lot of other places. That's scary. And so let's talk a little larger in California. If we zoom out a little bit. So California, this is another thing that caught me out of your article. States are allowed to do their own inspections, and California does. But in 2024, in the great liberal state of California, with the Gavin Newsom probably going to run for president, they had 23 inspections, 23 positions for inspectors to inspect the gun shops in a state of 39.4 million people. And it's huge geographically also. And so that 23 sounds bad. But then they only have about 50% of the positions filled. What does that say about a state government? Is that out of not caring, or they can't find people that want to be inspectors? Or is this just not an issue that there's been enough groundswell about that they'd be concerned about filling these positions?
Yeah, like there's been actually a more recent report that came out in July that continues to show like a lot of empty inspector positions. And I think this is a real concern, right? Like a state can choose to do inspections on top of the federal government. Again, the ATF is responsible for inspecting dealers. Their sort of dealer inspection function has historically been underfunded. And a lot of things are surely slipping through the cracks. So a state like California, as you say, a state that has invested in a lot of gun control legislation, has invested in this regime of inspections, but they, are not adequately staffed. There's now a requirement that every dealer be inspected by the state every 3 years, just kind of based on looking at this new report. It doesn't seem like they're on track to meet that at this point. So you can write a law, but you have to have the inspectors to actually go out and do it. And it just doesn't seem like they are on target to do that. So, I haven't reported enough on the actual filling of these posts to know exactly why so many of them are vacant. But I do know in my discussions with folks that they have pointed to that as a real concern. And another reason why we might not know exactly what's going on with a certain store or a certain chain is that it's not being documented.
Another thing from your articles, I should say, talked about Attorney General Keith Ellison in Minnesota filed suit against Fleet Farm and settled for $1 million, but also, and this is the part that caught me because $1 million is nothing really, but they agreed to change their training and discipline related to straw purchasers and implement a new system that informs staff when a buyer's previous purchases were recovered as crime guns. That seems like a basic requirement that should be nationwide, right? Like, sorry, you bought a gun, 8 months later or 15 months later, whatever, it showed up at a homicide. Maybe that's someone we don't want to sell a gun to. One would think that would be all over, but I don't think there's any really hope for us getting that.
Yeah, so that's such an interesting comparison. This legal case that was playing out in Minnesota, where they got that as part of the settlement, that the store would implement this policy that would flag, to their clerks when they're going through a sale, if someone previously buys a gun from them and it shows up at a crime scene, pop up and tell the employee that, and that can be a really helpful piece of information, right? You can think that would help employees catch straw purchasing. As an ATF agent told me, like, straw purchasing is a very kind of devious crime. Like, you're buying a firearm on behalf of someone else. You're trying to trick the store staff in that process, and so if someone's a good enough actor, like, maybe they can trick the store staff, but they'll put a little more scrutiny into it if they have a notification like that. And so, one would think that would be a policy that would help limit concerning sales. And it's one of the few examples that we've found, that I found in my reporting, of kind of government really treating these large kind of multi-location gun dealers as a chain. So one thing that's popped up when we were looking at Turner's in California is that many different Turner's locations are the source of a large volume of crime guns, right? It's not just one store that's accounting for all this. It's the store in San Bernardino, the store in the city of Los Angeles, there's store outside Sacramento, a store in Bakersfield, one in San Diego. It's not any single place, but these chains aren't typically regulated as chains. The stores individually hold a license. So when the inspector goes in, he or she might find a million problems at one store location, but they don't then kind of use that to look at sister stores. So that's part of the reason the Fleet Farm legislation was really interesting. They also kind of released some internal communications from Fleet Farm about sort of the conversations behind the scenes when they do suspect a straw purchase is happening that are really interesting. But yeah, no, I appreciate you flagging that. It's such an interesting contrast.
Yeah, I mean, one would think that even people who are pro-gun, who just don't want the guns to get in the hands of wrong people, would be for that. But that would require some level of data collection, and they don't want that. Can you tell us about what the status is of Assembly Bill 1743? For our audience, it would expand access to detailed crime data to government agencies, including cities and counties, which, by the way, seem to not have it, and researchers of public universities and colleges in the state. Is that the main part of the bill? And also, can you tell us a little bit about, what are the people who are opposing this saying?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting bill. We were talking earlier about UC Davis and how they have access to kind of even more granular data than we can see as members of the public. That would basically expand that access to other research universities as well as local governments. So if, say, Alameda County wanted to look at this, they could do it. If the city of Sacramento wanted to look at this data, they could do it. I'm just calling this up, doing some live reporting. It looks like the bill is currently active. The session won't end for a few weeks yet, so we don't know if this will become law or not. But I believe the folks who would be opposing this would say, and we heard this in response to my reporting, that flagging individual retailers is kind of a naming and shaming thing. That's typically what you hear from Second Amendment groups about this kind of data, and when sort of the ATF has put out piecemeal crime data in the past, they've accused them of naming and shaming. So I believe that would be the concern from Second Amendment groups about this bill.
I wonder how those same people feel about gang databases or flock cameras, ShotSpot.
Right. Well, and if you think about, the degree to which cars are regulated, those are also, potentially deadly consumer products, and the government is keeping very close watch over who has the registration to every single car, what the serial number is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have anything like that. And in California, even, they're not able to complete many traces because the kind of data tracking systems have only come online in recent years. They only started tracking handgun sales in 2010. They only started tracking long gun sales in 2014. So if a crime gun shows up that was sold in another state, they can't trace it. Crime gun shows up, it was sold in 1995. It can be challenging to trace. And that's without even getting into ghost guns, which are also not traced to dealers.
Okay. In the USA Today, there was a USA Today article in 2024 that listed gun dealers. I guess it was released by the ATF that had a low to time to crime rate. And 64% of Turner stores were listed for additional scrutiny. So can you tell us what became of that program and with the ATF, and did it have any impact? Is there any evidence that it had an impact on Turner's practices at all?
I'm not aware of that impacting Turner's practices at all. So this program is called the Demand 2 program. If you had, I believe, 25 or more crime guns traced to your store with a low time to crime, you would get a letter from the ATF and you would be subject to kind of additional scrutiny. What is going on with that program right now? We can't really say because the ATF has stopped disclosing this list of dealers that that are in the program. The USA Today has been tracking this reporting for this program for a long time, and ATF has stopped substantively answering those FOIA requests. So who's in it? We don't know. You do see a lot of chain retailers who are, likely selling large volumes of firearms in this list. And it just gets you kind of a little bit of extra scrutiny from ATF. Exactly what that looks like, as with many things in the world of gun dealers, is not something that's really disclosed to the public.
Okay, last question. I didn't really see any comment from Turners in any of your reporting. Have they responded at all? Has there been official comment at all from the chain?
Yeah, so that's a great point. Obviously, we tried very stridently and repeatedly to contact Turners. In fact, I called them and I left a voicemail, and very quickly got an email back from a Turners executive. And then when I shared with him what was going to be in our story, many of the stats and information that you would see reading it now, they went cold. And it's not for lack of trying on my part to get in touch with them. So Turners actually did comment to the Daily Caller. Folks might know that as the conservative media organization. Said something to the effect of like our record keeping and training is top notch, and that a crime gun trace doesn't equal culpability on the part of the dealer, which is true. And I think if you read our story, you'll see it's law enforcement sources were telling us that it's the large volume of crime gun traces that is really concerning here, less than any single trace. But we should keep in mind what these traces represent. These can be connected to homicides, domestic violence incidents, even possession cases, right? These are people judged to be like too dangerous to be allowed to have a firearm. Any crime gun trace is something concerning. But to get back to Turners, like a few times over the years, they've commented in court cases or things like that. But they are not a company that appears in the media much. They have a video podcast that I was keeping tabs on in this reporting, but they didn't have anything at all to say to me. And like I say, we send them called a no surprises note. Like, we don't want them to be surprised by anything that's in the story. We want them to have the opportunity to respond to everything that is in the story. So we lay it all out. We say, we will welcome any comment. We're not telling you what to say. We're just telling you what's going to be in the story. This is your opportunity to have your perspective shared. And they declined to share their perspective to me.
Of course they are. They're so confident that what they're doing is legal and helpful and not against any rules or guidelines or practices the community would want, that they just can't simply be bothered to comment about it. And it's not, I agree with you. I wouldn't be even remotely interested in the topic if it was one of their guns had a time to crime that was low. I don't care if it's a day, a week, a month. Yeah, maybe if they sold someone, like they sold the guy with the shotgun at the White House or at that event. I mean, yeah, those one-offs get you, but the fact that there's so many of their guns, and it's so many of their guns from so many of their stores, it's significantly alarming, and it should not be just turned a blind eye to. Arron Mendelson, thank you so much. Go ahead.
Can I make one point, Tracy?
Yep.
So you mentioned that really high-profile case, man who allegedly tried to assassinate President Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in April. Was armed with a firearm that he bought at a Turner's in Torrance, California. The other kind of case that people might be familiar with of a Turner's customer being in international news was the San Bernardino shooter. If people remember the San Bernardino mass shooting over a decade ago, this was the deadliest terrorist incident in the United States since 9/11. They were armed with firearms purchased at a Turner's. And so to the degree that this company has ever made the news for crime guns, it was really that. But like you say, we're trying to step back and look at it more holistically and, put this information out there.
Well, great reporting. We really appreciate it. Arron Mendelson, thank you so much for jumping on our podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Tracy.
That was Arron Mendelson, a data reporter at The Trace. As I said before, it's nothing definitive, but it seems like something might be going on here, right? Could it be cheap guns, location, internal practices, or combination? It's most likely a combination, something there with a little bit of everything there, right? You would think that for retailers that wanted to be responsible, they would just work as a group or individually, or preferably as a group, to just adopt Fleet Farm's practices now. Have the data set up so that when someone goes to buy a gun, it can pop up in the retailer's computer and say, the dealer's computer and say, this person has 1, 2, 3, 8, 10 guns that have shown up at crime scenes, and they all have short time to crime. These practices would definitely prohibit and significantly slow down at least straw purchasers. We also need to do something about this practice, which is very common throughout the country, which is thefts. But they're not real thefts. They're fake thefts. If you're a straw purchaser and you know that gun might get traced back to you, the gun comes back traced to you, you just say, hey, I don't know what's going on. Must have gotten stolen. We need a law that says every so many days, every 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, you must certify with the government. Go online and certify you still have the weapon and all the ammo you've bought. If it gets stolen, you have like 48 hours, 72 hours to report it to police. Absent that, you're committing a crime if you fail to report it. All of this would start to work to hopefully convince people not to become straw purchasers, or at least slow it down. Is it going to stop it? By no means. We're a country obsessed with guns. We're a country obsessed with using guns to solve problems, especially when people are younger. It's horrible, but it's what it is. And if we're not going to take meaningful steps, it's hard to see what is going to change anything. Shooting up a school in Connecticut isn't going to do it. I don't know what is. Thanks for listening, everyone. We really appreciate it. As always, please share with your friends and contacts, and I'll be back with you next week. Thanks for staying with us to the end. If you believe in this work, like this video and subscribe to help us amplify our message. And if you want to be part of the change, check out the links below to support or get involved.